So we all love white noise risers. They're cool. They help us emphasize transitions, and I'm trying to protect my mic from the wind here. I hope it's not too windy for recording. But anyways, how do you implement white noise risers when you're playing live, right? So there's two ways. You've seen both on the brief clip at the intro. The first one is you plan them beforehand, and then you trigger them with your pads if you have something like a launch key. But also, if you want to just go with the flow and sometimes insert changes you didn't plan before and maybe you want to emphasize them with the riser on the fly, you can do so as well. You saw me press a key on my keyboard to trigger a kind of fall effect. So I'm going to show you how to do both, and let's get right to it. So here I am in Ableton, and as you can see, I have prepared a MIDI track. We're going to be using some samples. So since we're going to use some samples, I'm going to grab an instance of Simpler, drag it onto this track. And I like to set it to one shot as well, because this way, no matter how long the MIDI note is that we feed into Simpler, the sample will play back from start to finish, which is what we want. But one instance isn't sufficient, right? Because we need two samples actually, a riser to precede the change from, I don't know, the verse to the chorus, right? And then we need a kind of full sample after the change happens. So Simpler, as you probably know, can only load up one sample. So we're going to need to right-click here, group this. That'll create an instrument rack. And now we can just Command D or Control D if you're in Windows to duplicate our Simpler. Great, so now we have two Simplers. We can host two separate samples. Let's actually go find those samples. And you can, of course, use whichever samples you prefer. I like to go with the ones that come with Ableton. So I'm just going to go to Samples down here, and let's type in white noise. We have a riser effect. Perfect. And then we have a fall effect as well. Brilliant. So I'm going to drag the first sample onto my first instance of Simpler, and then the second sample will go onto the second instance. Right, so now we've loaded up the samples into Simpler, but what happens now if we trigger this instrument rack with a MIDI note, be it on a clip that we're going to launch, or directly by pressing a key on our keyboard, we're just going to play back both samples at the same time, which is, of course, not what we want. So what we need to do is we need to kind of separate those two samples. And traditionally, what you would use is you would use the chain pane here. Not going to spend a ton of time on this because, as you probably guessed, it's not what we're going to use. But basically, you can assign different values to your different Simplers, and therefore the samples you loaded onto them. And then when you record a MIDI clip, you can write in some automation, and if we automated the chain parameter to be anywhere between 0 and 41, in this case, it would trigger the first sample and not the second one. And if the value was between 43 and 102, it would completely ignore the first instance of Simpler and only trigger the second one. So that is all good and well, but it's not going to work if we just want to trigger a specific sample on the fly on our keyboard. So I'm just going to press Command Z a couple times here. And what I've found to be a useful alternative to this that allows both scenarios to happen, both triggering a clip and playing live on your keyboard, is to use the velocity pane instead. So let's switch over to that one. Same principle here as well. Gonna move this all the way down to 63. And for the second instance, we're gonna go 64 upwards. So right now, whenever we trigger Simpler with a MIDI note, the velocity is what's important. So velocity is between 1 and 63, which means low velocities are gonna trigger the riser, and velocities between 64 and 127 are gonna trigger the second sample, the fall sample. And I know what you're going to say, velocity is going to mess with the volume as well, right? The harder we press our keys, the more volume is going to come out of the sample, right? But we can easily fix that by just changing the volume to velocity parameter on Simpler. move it all the way down to 0 for the first instance as well. Boom, problem solved. Right, so at this point, without further ado, let's just go ahead and create an empty MIDI clip here. And I'm actually going to make it a little longer, and I'll explain to you why in just a second. I want it to be 4 bars long, which means we need to go up to where it says 5 here. Okay. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4 bars. Now let's write in the notes. It's going to be C3, of course, because that's the root note of Simpler. Notes above it will cause Simpler to actually change the audio sample, pitching it up. Notes below it will cause Simpler to pitch it down. We want our samples to be played back just the way they are, right? So let's set this to C3, and then actually let's make this a little longer so I can move it around more freely. I'm just going to duplicate it and put it on here as well, where the third bar starts. And then, of course, we need to set the velocities the way we want them to. So let's drag this down all the way to the minimum value for the first note, which is going to trigger the riser. And we can actually leave it there for the second note. It's within that 64 to 127 interval. So let's hear what we got. Okay, so the samples were triggered the way we intended to, thanks to the different velocity levels. I still owe you an explanation as to why I've made this 4 bars long. And it has to do with this parameter right here. I believe it's called the sync value. So to explain in detail how that works goes beyond the scope of this video. And if you're playing live with Ableton, you probably have an understanding of it already. But basically, this is kind of the time window you have to make your changes. So suppose I wanted to switch from scene number 1, which has maybe my verse, to number 2, which has maybe the chorus. So it's not like the moment I press the key that I have assigned to scene number 2, the change immediately happens, right? Because it would probably be out of sync because we're not machines. So what we want to do is we want to have a certain time window within which we can perform that action, and then at the end of that time window, Ableton is going to actually perform the action perfectly in sync, right? So I've set this to 2 for my live sets because I think it's big enough to allow me to perform all the changes I need, but it's not too big, which would kind of limit your creativity, because whatever you want to do, you're bound by that 4 bar window. So if you want to perform quicker changes, you cannot do that, right? So that is why I've set our noise, let's call it noise transition clip here, to a length of 4, because the first 2 bars of it are going to be the last 2 bars of, say, scene number 1, okay? And then when the full sample starts, that's when scene number 2 starts as well, right? So the last 2 bars of, say, our verse are going to be occupied by the riser, and the first 2 bars of our chorus, let's say, are going to be occupied by our full sample. Good, so that is it. That is basically what I was doing at the beginning of this video. I just was making sure to trigger my clip at the right timing, and I had, again, a 2-bar window to do so, so not many chances to go wrong there, right? But what I also did, as we've mentioned before, is I just pressed a key on my keyboard to trigger an instant false sample, right? And the beauty of that is I don't need to, figure out, okay, I'm going to trigger it now, so it will affect the song in 2 bars worth of time. I can just do it, and it happens immediately. So we can do that, but there's one extra step required, because remember how we want to make sure to always trigger Simpler with a C3 note, right? Now, that shouldn't be too much of a problem if you have a big keyboard, maybe a stage piano or something, and you always know where C3 is going to be, right? But if you have something smaller than that, like in my case, I have the launch key Mini, which is basically 2 octaves. So I'm not always sure where C3 is going to be, right? Maybe I've changed the octaves, moving everything upwards because I wanted to play a lead part, but then maybe I wanted to play some bass, so I moved everything down by a couple octaves. you know, you might not always be aware of where C3 actually is. And especially if you're playing live, you don't want to waste time having to think about these sorts of things, right? So a solution to that, which I think is very elegant, is to use Ableton's pitch effect, which you can find under MIDI effects. And, you know, it comes with Ableton, so there's no need to download any third-party plugins, which I love, as you probably know by now. So I'm just going to drag pitch before our instrument rec, and I'm actually going to duplicate it because we need 2 instances of it. And here's how it works. On the first one, we're going to set the parameter all the way down to minus 128 semitones. And what that does is, no matter which note you play, and also no matter what octave it is, you know, it could be a C3, D4, F5, whatever it is, it's all going to be flattened down, so to speak, to the lowest possible note, which is set down here, and it's C minus 2. So whatever you play, what is going to reach our instrument rec track is a C minus 2 note. All notes are going to be equal, and they're all going to be C minus 2, is what I'm trying to say, right? And then what you can do with your second instance of pitch is you can transpose that by 5 octaves, which is equal to 60 semitones, right? 12 times 5 is 60. And that will turn that C minus 2 note into, you've guessed it, C3. So basically whatever you play is going to be C3, which is perfect. So yeah, that way you can also trigger a full sample anytime without it being synced. You can just go with the flow and insert it wherever you please, but just pressing whichever key on your keyboard. You just got to remember to use a relatively high velocity. So, you know, don't just press it very softly, be a little more decisive. Whereas if you want to insert a riser sample, you would do the same thing, but play that note with a lower velocity. So, you know, press your keys more softly. But that's it basically. So yeah, that's the method I found most useful to implement white noise risers into my live sets. Let me know if this was useful to you. Always happy to read your comments. And if you have any suggestions about maybe an even better method to do this, then I would like to hear about it even more. Definitely looking forward to your feedback. And if this was useful to you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Helps me out a lot and helps the channel grow so that I can do more videos like this one. All right, enough for today. Thank you so much for watching. And I'll see you in the next video. As always, in about 2 weeks' time. I really hope it wasn't too windy of a recording. Sometimes it's a little windy out here, and for various reasons, I couldn't record this in my bedroom today. I had to go outside, and so I just thought I might as well do it in a public park. It's nice weather, but a little windy, as I say, so forgive the quality of the recording. All right, that's it. See you in 2 weeks' time. Take care.